Welcome to Drink Beer, Think Beer, the podcast that gets to the bottom of every pint. I'm John Hall. Let's talk about homebrewing and how it's evolved and what it still brings to the larger beer world. Brad Ring, the publisher of BYO Magazine, is my guest this week as we talk about the revised version of the Big Book of Homebrewing. But first, All About Beer is back online and producing original content for beer enthusiasts and professionals. Visit allaboutbeer.com to see the latest. And if you want to support us in that endeavor, we've set up a Patreon for both readers and professional companies in the beer space. Check out patreon.com/allaboutbeer to learn more. And for more audio content, search All About Beer on your podcast platform of choice and listen to the shows that are now available, including the All About Beer podcast, Beer Travelers, and Brewer to Brewer. We're able to bring you this show each week thanks to the companies that support independent journalism in the beer space. You can learn more about our surprisingly affordable rates by emailing info@allaboutbeer.com. Speaking of that, today's episode is sponsored by the Harpoon Brewery. Did you know that Harpoon IPA is New England's original IPA? Join Harpoon Brewery employee owners Megan Wilson and Greg Moon as they discover other unexpected New England originals in food, beverage, entertainment, sports, community engagement, and more on the New England Originals podcast, which is available on Spotify. And are you headed to Colorado for GABF? You should check out the Denver Rare Beer Tasting on October 7th. It's an incredible afternoon of beer passion featuring America's top craft breweries, pouring rare, exotic, and vintage brews to benefit the Pints for Prostates campaign. This is truly a bucket list event for a great cause where you get to try beers you won't find anywhere else. And you can meet the men and women who brewed them. More information and tickets are at pintsforprostates.org. A few weeks ago, I spent some time in Vermont, touring around breweries, catching up with old friends, and doing a little promotion for the Craft Brewery Cookbook, which, by the way, is available now where books are sold. At two of my book signing stops, I teamed up with Brad Ring. He is a longtime friend and colleague and the publisher of Brew Your Own magazine. BYO has a long and storied history and is the best resource for anyone looking to get into homebrewing or looking to add on homebrewing knowledge. And I'm not just saying this because I host a monthly podcast for BYO about nano brewing or because I've written for the magazine over the years. It's true because it's smart and detailed, and it's a publication that's run by dedicated homebrewers who appreciate history and where things are headed. Much like professional brewing, homebrewing has evolved, and Ring and his team constantly keep their fingers on the pulse. In keeping with the times, BYO has recently released an updated version of the Big Book of Homebrewing, and you can find that where good books are sold, as well as the BYO website. So I sat down with Ring in his office just before a book signing, and he opened up some cans of a Lawson's Finest Liquid Pale Ale, and we talked about the new book and homebrewing in general. Here's our conversation. What do you see as the current state of homebrewing in America right now?
Well, I think first off, there has never been a better time to be a homebrewer. When I started about 30 years ago homebrewing, ingredients were tough to come by, usually stale. Equipment was non-existent. You had to make it yourself. And even information, I was relying on UK published books from the 70s by a guy named Dave Line. And then obviously Charlie Papazian's book. But now, I mean, you can come out of the gates, incredible diversity of good ingredients, incredible equipment options, and really good and solid information out there. So if you want to start homebrewing or get back into it, there's never been an easier time to make great beer at home. The state of the industry, right now, I'd say the pandemic definitely gave it a quick uptick. We had, and talking with, this was our experience, and talking with other retailers, there were a lot of people that got back into it. So they were dusting off equipment that was maybe in the back of the garage or down in the basement, and exploring that option. But there were also a lot of new people getting into it, so that was fun. and it was good to see some new blood coming into it. It was, basically the alcohol version of the bread and sourdough phenomenon that was going on. So, people were cooped up at home.
Did you see wine uptick as well?
Wine did uptick, but as with beer and wine, because I do both as magazines, wine is definitely much smaller compared to homebrewing.
Okay.
Yeah. So with homebrewing, it also benefits by the sheer fact that you've got alcohol as the end product.
Yeah.
Right? So if you're stuck at home, working from home suddenly, worried about everything going on with the pandemic, being able to produce your own alcohol, not a bad way to go.
Yeah.
Compared to other options that were out there, and watching Tiger King for the fourth time. So
still have never seen it.
No,
we missed that in the early part of the pandemic.
I'm sure it's still around.
Yeah.
So definitely saw an uptick, and some of the folks stuck with it, but I think a lot of people then moved on to other things once the world started opening up again. So talking with a lot of retailers, as well as just seeing our own circulation numbers, definitely took an uptick and leveled off, and now it's down a little bit.
Is with the growth of craft beer, and I know back in the day there's a lot of homebrewers that decided to go pro.
Yeah.
And now 9,000 breweries in the country, there are a lot of people who get interested in brewing simply because there are breweries that can employ them. Mm-hmm. And they're kind of skipping that step that a lot of generations did by homebrewing and going straight into brewery production. And I'm wondering if the number of breweries in the country right now is a hurdle for home brewing.
Oh, definitely.
Yeah.
Definitely. I think, the motivation behind home brewing has certainly changed over the years. It was tough, like my generation of sort of home brewers getting into it. It was as much about exploring beer styles that you just could not find, and just finding fresh beer, that wasn't one of the big macros. And that obviously is much different now. So I think there's an incredible interest in craft beer, and usually homebrewing would mirror, in a smaller way, the interest in craft beer.
Sure.
But what we ended up seeing, I think in the last maybe 5 to 8 years, is that then it started to split a little bit. And as more homebrewers, we also had a significant number of homebrewers leaving to go into the craft beer industry,
right?
Especially after the last recession. So,
homebrewing. So back in 2008,
yeah. So and homebrewing's a very interesting dynamic, and so I've published Brew Your Own now for well over 2 decades, and basically it performs best when the economy is at its worst. And
so you're the guy who's in the background going, "Come on, recession!"
Yeah. I mean, it's a very interesting dynamic, and so during the recession, huge growth in 2008 through 2010.
Sure,
lots of people got into it, and then a lot of people decided, lifestyle choices. Maybe they were laid off or unhappy and forced to take a look in the mirror and figure out what they wanted to do for their next chapter of life. And a lot of them wanted to get into craft brewing. And so they graduated from home brewer to craft brewing. And that was great and a fun growth time, I think, for both home brewing and craft beer.
Yeah.
But at a certain point, and I know I've got 3 kids in their 20s, and I make them homebrew with me and have over the years. But among their friends, they're all going to craft beer bars and visiting tap rooms, but very few of them have an interest because of the accessibility of great beer around almost every corner here in the U.S.
Yeah.
That the motivation to make your own isn't quite there.
Isn't it?
And we'll see whether, if the economy continues the way it does. We do have a huge, larger than ever base of people out there that are interested in all the incredible diversity of flavors and styles of craft beer. But will they keep spending $20 for a 4-pack?
Yeah.
If times get a little tighter? We'll see. And if so, then those are the folks that are probably the prime market to become, hopefully, homebrewers and not just abandon beer altogether.
There is also, though, an economic barrier if you're going to get serious about home brewing as well. I remember somebody saying, I can only afford to either get really into golf or really into home brewing, but I can't afford to do both. Yeah. Because the equipment, you can buy a Mr. Beer kit for $20, but if you want to do it for, or whatever they go for these days.
I think it's like anything else.
Yeah.
Whether it's golf or home brewing, there's some folks that are going to, money is no object. They're going to spend a ridiculous amount of money and much more than they need to spend to make good beer. But the reality is, and I know plenty of homebrewers out there, that they will make great beer just using plastic buckets and an igloo cooler, and they don't need, the triclover clamps and all sorts of. I mean, you can
they're
get
nice to have, but
and they're if you want to spend money on shiny metal and have incredible a range of gadgetry, that's out there for you now. That didn't used to be the case, and that's great. And incredible control over temperature and glycol systems and all sorts of stuff that was not even in the realm of thinking about, a dozen years ago.
Yeah.
But do you really, really need all of that tricked out stuff? I don't think so. I mean, there was still pretty good homebrew being made before that was available.
Yeah.
So it's really, it can be as cost effective or not as you want to make it.
Yeah.
But it's really a pretty basic, simple thing. And I often tell people, if you can boil water, you can make beer.
Yeah.
And whether or not there's an intimidation, I mean, sometimes, and you certainly see it on the wine side, where the sort of mumbo jumbo of the noble arts and this and that, and it's almost made to seem on a brewery tour somehow another realm of skill and equipment needed. But with homebrewing, the interesting thing, as opposed to home winemaking, is that you're starting with the same basic raw ingredients. Versus I don't have access to Cabernet grapes from Silverado Trail in Napa on the wine side, and very few people do. But I can get all the same world-class malts, that the big boys in the craft industry, have as well.
Yeah.
So, that's great, and it's fun to be able to have access to that.
The first edition of the book, which came out 5 years ago.
Yeah, 5 years ago.
Yeah. I enjoyed it at the time because it was a lot of fun to be able to go through it, and as somebody who has dabbled in homebrewing but never fully embraced it, largely I'll say because I lived in an apartment, which is sort of my cop-out answer, because you can still brew. Like some of my best friends who went on to become professional brewers were home brewers in a one-bedroom apartment in New York City. Like it's not a thing. But I love reading recipes and I love reading cookbooks, and that's what this book is in or at least the first edition, and I know continuing into this latest edition. First of all, what changed between the first edition and the second edition? Because a lot happens in beer in 5 years.
Well, especially the last 5 years. I would say both from a homebrewing standpoint and even wider into the craft brewing side, I'd say that there have been more substantial changes in brewing techniques and approaches to making beer in the last 5 years than certainly in the prior 15 for me.
Sure.
Good example of that is certainly the approach to how you add hops.
Yeah.
There used to be the standard 60-minute boil, and you would add it at certain times, and a bittering addition, and as you got towards the end, it would become more for aromatics. And obviously now, you've got plenty of brewers that are adding almost all their hops either right at the end of the boil or even after the boil into whirlpool and beyond into dry hopping. And, that's been fascinating. So we've got a lot of new content in there about not only all the new variety of hops that are available, but also the hopping techniques and how that has changed, and how now there's a little bit more understanding of the impact of that, and both on the good and bad side, and the bitterness that was discounted early on, like, well, they're not picking up any bitterness. Of course they are, and that's been shown. And so covering things like that, there's also things like the quicker way to get to a sour beer. It may not have all the layers of the traditional methods found in Brussels.
Sure.
But kettle souring is that really was not on the map as much 5 years ago.
Sure.
And as and so a lot of these, and there's certainly an old school element that is rolling their eyes at some of these things, because we're talking essentially about how to make hazy IPAs and kettle sours, but the popularity, not only on the craft beer side, but on the homebrewing side, it's there. It's there, and people want to replicate at home often, or do riffs on what they see at their local craft breweries, and that's always been the case.
Has it always been the case? Because the history that I remember of people saying, well, it was the homebrewers that were informing the general beer, professional beer culture, back in the 80s and 90s and everything. But it sounds like now, if professional brewers are pushing kettle sours and they're selling, and hazy IPAs and they're selling, has it flipped where professional brewing?
Well, there's
now,
always, I guess it's been a push-pull.
Okay.
All along.
Okay.
So yeah, I think there's no doubt, and I certainly feel strongly that, without the homebrewing hobby, craft beer certainly wouldn't be where it is today. Not only because of the number of people who have graduated from homebrewer to craft brew ranks and opening up craft breweries in every corner of the U.S., but also just pushing the innovation side and having the freedom to explore, experiment, and find some of these things that then become, a new style. Whether that style stick around for any period of time, who knows? But so there's always been that element, but there's also been, and I mean, before owning Brew Your Own, I worked for a book publisher and was in charge of their beer book program, and worked on a collection of what at the time we decided to call clone recipes. So it was homebrew recreations of popular craft and imported beers. And so there's always been that interest, right? In especially maybe not in the early days where there weren't any craft breweries around to replicate, or very few. But now, people, especially as they're getting into the hobby, they want to replicate their favorite beer, and that's always been a very popular part of Brew Your Own magazine over the years. We do annual readership surveys, and the clone recipes always come back very highly rated, as something that people want. And we'll work with the breweries to make sure that they're as accurate as they can be, and obviously it's not a matter of just trimming it. You got to figure out with the scale and the equipment differences, what you can do. But it's people seem to be happy with the results that they get, and whether they're trying to make a treehouse beer in California, and all these things. So it's people as they travel around. We have a column called The Replicator that's been around for at least 2 decades, and it's kind of a fun. I have no original ideas myself, so I think it was either Bon Appetit or there was one of the food magazines where they would write in, and I had coq au vin at this French restaurant. Can you get me the recipe?
Sure.
And I was like, well, we can do that with homebrewing.
Yeah.
And it's a fun comp. So people will talk about maybe a great beer that they had on vacation somewhere, and I'd love to make it at home.
And can you help me?
Yeah.
More in a moment, but first, thanks to the companies that help keep us on the air. If you'd like to help out the show as well, you can reach out to info@allaboutbeer.com. Today's episode is sponsored by the Harpoon Brewery. Did you know that Harpoon IPA is New England's original IPA? Join Harpoon Brewery employee owners Megan Wilson and Greg Moon as they discover other unexpected New England originals in food and beverage, entertainment, sports, community engagement, and more on the New England Originals podcast. It's available on Spotify. And if you're headed to Colorado for GABF, you should check out the Denver Rare Beer Tasting on October 7th. It's an incredible afternoon of beer passion, featuring America's top craft breweries pouring rare, exotic, and vintage brews to benefit the Pints for Prostates campaign. This is truly a bucket list event for a great cause, where you get to try beers you won't find elsewhere and also meet the men and women who brewed them. More information at pintsforprostates.org. And now, back to the conversation. When homebrewers get to the point, because the book, I think, really wonderfully lays out different styles, and obviously they've been tested, and obviously that the results, if they follow the recipe, it's a lot like baking. You're going to have something that you're going to enjoy at the end of it. What sort of level of, is it confidence, does it take to start writing your own recipes?
I think having some of the basics down, certainly. I mean, you can start winging it, and there's certainly, I mean, it's why I think a lot of people really enjoy not only the hobby of brewing, but you talk to a lot of pro brewers as well, and they love that it's equal parts artistry and creativity as well as then the science. And so I think once you get into developing your recipes, you do need to have, some of the basics under your belt. You need to, most importantly, have that clean environment and,
sure.
and know that things can go south in a hurry if you're not keeping things clean. But also just have some of your basic techniques down where you can hopefully then build from. And then maybe take a recipe, but start experimenting with some different equipment, either technique changes or different yeast strain or whatever, and start tinkering, and then go off from there. And there's certainly, there's some good software out there that will help you get in the right ballpark before you go out and buy ingredients.
Sure.
But I've always had fun going off and just creating a totally custom beer. And sometimes it's fun almost doing the homebrew version of the Iron Chef, where you see what's in the cupboard and you just
kind of go from there. Yeah.
And see what you can do.
Yeah. And I've talked to professional brewers who are like, well, we meant to mash in that day and we realized that we didn't have everything that we needed, so we substituted, and it turned out to be a really great beer, and now we make that all the time. Yeah. It's the waiting that, as the famous song goes, is the hardest part, I think, for the, okay, did this work? And then you have a couple of weeks before.
Yeah, I mean, there's definitely a little bit of delayed gratification, and hopefully it's gratification, instead of disappointment that you get, after 3 weeks or a month. But I mean, there's some patience there, and versus just being able to, walk a block or two away and grab a 4-pack.
Yeah.
But what I've always encouraged people, anyone that has an interest in craft beer, is this is an incredible way to understand beer in a completely different way. You're looking under the hood and really getting to appreciate it. So when you visit a brewery, you can understand it at a depth way more than someone who's just, sniffing it and drinking it and then commenting on it.
Yeah.
You can sort of start figuring out and thinking about, well, I wonder what they did to get this level of aromatics or the nuances, that other people are just, and the same thing is, it's really interesting on the wine side too.
Yeah.
There's so many people that just don't understand the basics of winemaking that I think they're missing the boat on what is in their glass and how it got there. And certainly on the beer side, you can take your appreciation and enjoyment of beer to a whole nother level once you start making it and understand what goes into it.
Yeah. Do you think you become a better drinker?
Oh, 100%.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, because you're actually going through the process of understanding the techniques and what can go wrong in a hurry.
Yeah.
And what can go right.
Yeah.
And so it allows you to appreciate, when you have a really nice beer in front of you, that, wow, they nailed it and they did it right. And, then you start thinking about, well, how did they get to that point? What techniques did they use? I wonder when they added their hops, I wonder what sort of, there's a lot of craft brewers that will put all the details out there, but a lot don't,
Yeah.
And so it's a fun guessing game,
Yeah.
that certainly I enjoy when I'm visiting a tap room,
Trying to put it all together.
Trying to sort of dissect, what's in the glass in front of me, but in a fun way. It's not, for me, it adds to the enjoyment of it versus, taking away and making it into a science experiment all the time.
You've brought up food a couple of times now and food magazines. And I was thinking back to, what people talk about cooking school and how you should be able to make an omelet with one arm tied behind your back. That should be the staple in every kitchen. Is there a beer style that every home brewer should master in that same way?
Yeah, I would say pale ale.
Okay. Traditional British American.
I'd say an American pale ale.
Okay.
That's certainly where I think the tastes are more at.
30-ish IBUs, Sierra Nevada.
Yeah, exactly. I mean,
1978.
Part of it is just my own prejudice that I'm a huge Sierra Nevada pale ale fan. And
sure.
I feel like pale ales have gotten lost in the mix with everything being IPA.
Yeah.
Which I love IPAs, but IPAs often can hide mistakes. There's a reason why a lot of people start off making big hoppy beers or big chunky stouts. They hide the mistakes.
Yeah.
And I'm not saying you need to go the other extreme and try to brew the perfect Helles, but that is an incredible accomplishment when you do.
Sure.
But let's find something middle of the road so you don't get disappointed and move on to golf.
Okay. Yeah.
Let's keep you in homebrewing. So I think just a well-made, nice sort of 5% or so pale ale. I mean, that is an incredible beer.
Yeah.
When well-made, and you can have a lot of fun with it too, and a lot of experimenting with different hops, et cetera, et cetera. So you can do a lot with it.
Yeah.
But it will show when you went south and didn't take care of what you needed to take care of. It's going to be hopefully subtle enough for that, but it'll be forgiving enough that you're still going to want to share it with your friends. Hopefully.
Are there styles that just simply do not translate to 5 gallons at a time?
I don't think so.
Okay.
I don't think so at all. No. I mean, and we've got some brewers and some of my coworkers that even brew in 1 gallon batches. And that, for me, that gets to be almost too small. Is it worth all the effort,
Right.
to get a couple 6-packs out of it?
Yeah.
But
If that.
But yeah, it's you can definitely do any style that's out there. It's just on a smaller scale. Obviously there's some things that are more complicated, but there's other things that are almost easier to do on a smaller scale. I mean, you can create a pretty easy cool ship at home versus like, the pros that it would be a much bigger endeavor or effort. And, but if you're doing it on a small enough scale, certainly, you have fun with that. And there's plenty of opportunities on the, with smaller barrels and, and even doing oak alternatives versus barrels and you can the world's your I mean, there's no limits on what you can do on the homebrew side.
Were you going to say the world is your oyster stout?
I could, but I gave that line to you.
Don't encourage it.
I gave that line to you. Yeah, and and you can you can add those oyster shells to that oyster stout. I don't know if you want to do the the old Colorado Rocky Mountain oyster stout that I had GABF a few years back.
Yeah, I missed it.
Was balls per barrel was the
that was
the recipe.
That was a Marty Jones.
Yes.
For those who don't know, Marty Jones was a longtime brewery hype man. Mm-hmm. One of the great PR guys who never let a joke
had enough barn
sit
and
on the
Bailey
table. And that Rocky Mountain oyster stout.
Oh, I had it.
I did too. And what was fascinating about it was that was back in the day for April Fool's Day jokes to be like, that's ridiculous. Yeah. That's never going to happen. And now, after they made it, every time April Fool's Day rolls around and brewers are like, we're going to do blah, blah, blah. And it's like, it's been done.
Yeah.
And even
pretty much
at the National Homebrewers Competition, when they do club night, I was reading through the list of what people were making. And there's people are really proud of their Helles and they're putting out some really world-class beers. And then they're like, so we went to Costco. And we got a couple of chickens, and we threw it in the mash, and this is our $5 Costco chicken ale. It's like, okay, like nothing is.
That was actually an old historic, the cock ale.
Is it?
Oh yeah,
with the chicken in it.
Well, because I used to read those Dave Line books from the 70s.
Yeah,
from the UK. Yeah, that was like a thing actually. I might draw the line at that one, but
I would love to see you recreate that recipe in an upcoming issue of the magazine.
All right.
For the modern age
cover story, but
probably not.
The sous vide chicken.
I would try it.
Yeah. So, but it's always fun, with homebrewing. There's what is really enjoyable about the couple decades with Brew Your Own is the passion. And really the sense of fun that homebrewers have, about the hobby, and that it's taken seriously, but there's also sort of a wink in there too, which is great, because it should be a hobby, right?
Yeah.
You don't need no one needs a second job or a third job. You should be doing it for fun. It doesn't mean that you're not going to put your best effort into it and treat it with some seriousness. But it's also beer, and I think the majority of homebrewers get that, and for them, it's a great break from the rest of their lives, and they get to really have fun and be creative, or indulge in maybe the geekier side or whatever. It can be. It's a very flexible hobby too, which is cool. There's some that go super deep on the science side, and then there's others that could care less. Maybe they do what minimally they need to do, but they're not going to get too hung up on water science or other things. And that's great. So there's room for everybody to sort of dive deep into the things that they want to. And yet still have, at the end of the day, beer to share and enjoy and talk about. So
in that vein, what I love about the book is, for somebody who has been homebrewing, they can pick it up and they can be inspired by the recipes. For somebody who is not homebrewed, this is really a great introduction and primer, and walks them through how to get started and how to be doing it. So it works on a lot of different levels, and I think it makes a great gift, obviously, for people who are curious about beer and sort of making their own. But to that point, there's always this conversation that not always, but I've heard this conversation enough where somebody starts home brewing. It's like, oh, you're going to open up your own brewery one day. And that doesn't happen when somebody takes up golf later in life. It's like, oh, you're going to join the senior tour, or, any of these.
Yeah, no,
it's one of these hobbies where
that's interesting.
But because of the prevalence of breweries, people are like, well, this is just going to be the stepping stone to your next career. But it also strikes me that that's not a great reason to get into home brewing. Like, if it's a natural extension, that's fine. But it's everything that you were just saying of like the pleasure of doing it, and you can get as geeky as you want or not want. Has there been something lost in the last couple of years with people focusing on?
It's interesting. I mean, yeah, certainly compared to most other hobbies, there's not that sort of jumping to a professional
right.
Expectation
10,000 hours,
or a
right?
question, or serving your home brew and, oh, you should sell this. You should totally open up your own brewery.
Yeah.
It's I guess the interesting thing on the flip side of that is that there is this possibility, right? If you're golfing, you're not necessarily going to just show up in 3 years at the U.S. Open. And,
right. Exactly.
Except as a spectator.
Yeah. Where you've bought your ticket.
But with homebrewing, especially these days, and with the smaller scale craft brewing, and we cover some of that in the magazine and elsewhere on the nano side.
Yeah.
There are those opportunities, and the barriers to entry are lower than they've ever been to be able to make that jump if you want to do that. So I don't know. I don't know if it's a double-edged sword. But I'd like to think that it gives those people who do have that inclination, there is that opportunity to really take your hobby and go pro with it. But I think most people just enjoy it for what it is, which is a really fascinating hobby that you can keep doing and it keeps evolving. And there's always something else to learn, I'm often asked over the years, like,
yeah.
I mean, how many stories can you do on making beer? And we never have a shortage of story ideas here. And,
yeah.
We've been putting out the magazine for over 25 years, and we might revisit certain beer styles from time to time, but things change, evolve, and there's different ways to approach the same subject, and so it's been fun just seeing the growth of the hobby and how it's changed over the years.
Is there a book about beer that you have not been involved with that has stuck with you after reading it that you would encourage other folks to go out and try to find a copy and read it?
I think as far as like a great one just to like have on your shelf and pull down, and it's a great reference, the Oxford Companion.
Sure,
to
I
beer.
see it on your shelf over here.
Yeah. I to me that's fun because you can dive in and dive out of it. In addition, if you're needing specific information, that's well researched, you can find that. So I like that for just sort of the quick hits. For me, early days, I was very informed by, any of the Michael Jackson books, which, I haven't really revisited. I should do that and see how they're holding up with time. I'm sure great, but those were very influential and introduced me to this world of beer well pre-internet where, that's where suddenly it was like, geez, there's a lot going on in Belgium and other places, and all these fascinating beer styles that I then wanted to try to recreate at home because I couldn't get examples where I was living and things like that. So, so those would be kind of my couple that I would put in my backpack for the desert island.
Perfect. Thanks for doing this.
Yeah, no, it's great to have you here at the World Media headquarters.
At the mothership, this is great.
Here in the 1900 barn.
I love it. It's a really cool office. A reminder to get the big book of homebrewing where books are sold, as well as the Craft Brewery Cookbook, which is now also on sale where fine books are sold. Get a copy today. Also, All About Beer is back online. Go to allaboutbeer.com to catch up with great content. And if you want to keep in touch with me, questions, comments, guest suggestions, book recommendations, you can email me. It's John Hall, that's JOHNHOLL, at allaboutbeer.com. Or you can get with me on Twitter at John_Hall. Of course, All About Beer is also on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. Just follow along at All About Beer. And This Week in Rauch Beer is also online. The Facebook group is easy to search, and on Twitter and Instagram, it's at TW Rauch Beer. We're able to bring you this show each week thanks to the companies that want to support independent journalism in the beer space. If you would like to learn more about our surprisingly affordable rates, please don't hesitate to reach out to info@allaboutbeer.com. Speaking of that, today's episode was sponsored by the Harpoon Brewery. Did you know that Harpoon IPA is New England's original IPA? Join Harpoon Brewery employee owners Megan Wilson and Greg Moon as they discover other unexpected New England originals in food and beverage, entertainment, sports, community engagement, and more on the New England Originals podcast. You can find it on Spotify. And if you're headed to Colorado for GABF, or even if you're just going to head to Colorado, you should check out the Denver Rare Beer Tasting on October 7th. It's an incredible afternoon of beer passion featuring America's top craft breweries, pouring rare, exotic, and vintage brews to benefit the Pints for Prostates campaign. This is truly a bucket list event for a great cause, where you get to try beers you won't find elsewhere and meet the men and women who brewed them. More information at pintsforprostates.org. All About Beer has a podcast channel now. Search and subscribe on your podcast platform of choice. Steal This Beer has new episodes every Monday. And hey, the BYO Nano podcast, that comes out on the 15th of every month. Go visit allaboutbeer.com. As for this particular show, Nate Schweber does the music, Jeff Quinn designed our logo, and I'm John Hall. New episodes released every Wednesday. And that's when I'm going to be back again to drink beer and to think beer.